This is First Dallas Bank. Am I speaking with Olivia Manser? We need to discuss the overdue mortgage payment in your name. My name is Olivia Manser, and at that moment, the world around me went silent. It was the middle of an ordinary Tuesday. I was in the office with a hot cup of coffee in hand and a sales report open on my screen. Soft conversations and the tapping of keyboards filled the background, and everything seemed normal. Until that call. The sound of the word mortgage hit me like a dry thunderclap. Excuse... what? My voice came out quieter than usual, almost trembling. On the other end of the line, the male voice continued. Professional, polite, impersonal, like he was informing me about a package delivery, not the impending destruction of my life. We are reaching out because the property tied to the mortgage under your name has 3 overdue payments. The total loan amount is $480,000. We are looking for an amicable solution before resorting to legal action. I felt my throat dry up. The warmth of the coffee slipped away from my skin and was replaced by a paralyzing cold. The mug slid slightly from my hand, but I held on tightly. On the outside, I must have appeared still. On the inside, my mind was screaming. "Are you sure this contract is in my name?" I asked, forcing calm. "Yes, ma'am. I have the contract here. We can verify the information to ensure security. Full name, Olivia Marie Manser?" "Yes." "Social security number ending in 2947? "Yes." "Home address, 1104 Rosewood Lane, Dallas, Texas?" "Yes, that's my current address." "Great, so we're speaking with the right person." But I wasn't the right person. I knew that. I'd never bought property, never signed a mortgage, never applied for any loan like that. My life was too simple for that. "Send me the contract by email," I murmured. "Of course, Mrs. Manser. The system here registers your email as oliviamanser@gmail.com, correct?" "Yes." "Perfect. I'm sending it now. If you prefer, I can stay on the line while you check it." "No, just send it. Thank you." I hung up. I stayed there, staring at the computer screen where the sales numbers kept blinking as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. My body was tense, my shoulders stiff, my fingers numb. I didn't know if I wanted to scream, cry, or run away. Instead, I stood up. I silently walked to the office bathroom, locked myself in one of the stalls, and sat there on the closed toilet lid, breathing deeply, trying to keep my composure. 5 minutes later, back in my car, my phone buzzed with the notification, "Mortgage contract, First Dallas." I drove to my apartment almost on autopilot. Every traffic light seemed longer than the last. The city around me, vibrant and alive Dallas, felt miles away from the bubble I was in. Isolated, floating in panic. Once I got home, I threw my bag on the floor, kicked off my shoes, and sat down with the laptop on my lap, without even turning on the lights. The white screen lit up my face. My heart was pounding so loudly it felt like a drum in my ears. I clicked the attachment. And there it was. The contract. A file of nearly 30 pages. Terms, clauses, interest rates, deadlines. And the name, my name, appearing on every page with a naturalness that twisted my stomach. But the real shock came on the last page. The signature. Olivia Manser. A careful version of my handwriting. A drawing. An almost perfect imitation. Almost. An O with a subtly exaggerated curve. An M slightly tilted. Things that at first glance wouldn't stand out. But I recognized them. That wasn't my natural handwriting. It was an imitation. The difference between signing and copying is in the movement, the spontaneity. I didn't feel that gesture. It was as if someone had analyzed my old documents, practiced, repeated, and then applied it there, at the end of a contract for nearly $500,000. My body froze. My hands were shaking slightly. I touched my own fingers, trying to anchor myself in reality. I opened my finance folder on the computer, searched records, tax returns from the last 2 years, bank statements, credit applications, nothing. No movement indicating the acquisition of a property, no mortgage entry, no debt linked to that house. And then, on page 3 of the contract, I found the property address. 1173 Maple Hollow Drive. I had heard that address before, but I didn't know from where. Something pulsed in my mind, like a weak alarm trying to get my attention. I opened Google Maps, typed the address. I saw the house. A modern building, white facade with large windows and a light wood fence around it. Nice. Quiet. Seemingly harmless, and completely unfamiliar to me. I searched public property records. I found the purchase date, 11 months ago. I also found the digital deed, officially linking the property to Olivia M. Manser. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a meticulous farce, proven by public files. I closed my eyes for a moment. Who would do this? I opened my email inbox, used keywords: mortgage, property, financing, loan. Nothing. I searched deleted folders, spam, old files. No correspondence from the bank. No trace of that transaction. As if the purchase had been made completely separate from my life. Or rather, on top of my life. I thought about calling the bank again, demanding answers. But I stopped. No. Before that, I needed to understand. I needed to find the source. This wasn't an ordinary theft. Someone knew exactly where to step. Someone had access to my address, my banking details, my social security number. This wasn't some stranger. It wasn't an outside scam. It was someone from the inside. I opened my document safe. My passport, certificates, medical records, everything was there. But something bothered me. There was a folder missing. A navy blue one, where I kept old copies of signed forms. Student loans, old rental contracts, my acceptance letter for my first internship. I searched every drawer, turned over folders. The navy blue folder was gone. I stood up, went to the bedroom. The box of old files under the bed was still there, locked with a padlock. I took the key from the nightstand, opened it. The document seemed in order, but the brown envelope with copies of my digitized signature was missing. I knew it had been there months before, because I'd used it for an insurance reimbursement process. And now, it was gone. No. No. I went to my bookshelf. Books, papers, envelopes. I even opened the fridge, as if I expected to find answers among bottles of water and jars. Nothing made sense. My house was the same, and yet violated. I returned to the living room, sat on the floor, with my back against the wall, and hugged my knees. The laptop light was still on. The contract stared at me. My name was there, immortalized in a crime I didn't commit. I needed help, guidance, a plan. But above all, I needed an answer, and justice. I grabbed a notebook. Wrote Maple Hollow in big letters on the first page. Below, I started making a list. Property details, registration dates, people involved, bank contacts, unauthorized access to documents, suspects with access to my data. I wrote, scribbled, connected arrows, highlighted words. The room darkened as the night went on, and I didn't turn on any lights. I didn't even notice. I was submerged. A line was forming. A trail that led to a place I didn't want to visit, but couldn't ignore. I was sinking into something bigger than I had imagined. And for the first time in years, I felt real fear. But what I found as I investigated was far worse than I could have imagined. I grew up in Dallas, Texas, in a house where love was measured by an unfair scale. It wasn't that there was a lack of affection. It was just that it always went in the same direction, like a constant wind, but never toward me. In my house, there was a daughter made of light and another made of silence. The light one was my sister Emily, brilliant, spoiled, perfect in everyone's eyes. And me? I was the shadow cast behind her, always present, rarely noticed. Since we were little, the difference between us was treated as inevitable, like a law of nature. Emily was the daughter in the photos on the mantle, the subject of proud stories told at dinner, the albums organized with dates and carefully written captions. I was the daughter who appeared blurred in the background of the photo, or worse, cropped out at the edge. I remember the day I won my first writing contest at the age of 9. I wrote a story about a girl who wanted to fix time, about regrets, about longing. The teacher cried when she read it. I was awarded a certificate and a small golden trophy. I took it home, overflowing with pride. My mom barely looked. She was concerned about the dress Emily would wear for her ballet recital on Saturday. My dad said, "Cool, you can put that away later, okay? Don't leave it lying around the house." Don't leave it lying around. That phrase stayed in my mind like an invisible tattoo. It was as if my success was an inconvenience, a mess out of place. I learned there, at just 9 years old, that the shine I could squeeze from the world wasn't welcome at home. Emily, on the other hand, was treated as an extension of my parents' pride. When she started gymnastics at 6, my mom sewed bows and embroidery by hand on her leotards. My dad bought a new camcorder just to record her performances. When she quit gymnastics and wanted to become a singer, they hired a private singing teacher. Then it was painting, then photography, then interior design. Each phase was met with celebration, encouragement, and a generous budget. And me? I wanted to take guitar lessons. I got a used guitar from a neighbor, with out-of-tune strings and a cracked neck. I never took lessons. I taught myself, hidden in my room, watching free videos on an old cell phone. At school, teachers praised my discipline, my grades, my ability to solve everything on my own. At home, this was invisible. It became the expected, the obligation. When I got a perfect score on the college entrance exam, I waited, deep in my chest, for a different look from my dad. A late recognition, a simple phrase. He looked at the paper with my score, squinted, and said, "You're just doing your duty." Nothing more. No congratulations. No, you did it. Just that. That which knocked me down in a way no criticism ever could. The following week, Emily was accepted into an interior design course at a private college in California. The annual cost was more than the value of our car. And still, there was a party in the yard. Balloons, a candy table, champagne, my parents smiling, laughing, hugging. My mom, with teary eyes, kept repeating, "She's always been so creative. She was born for this." That night, I watched it all from a folding chair in the corner of the yard, holding a warm soda in my hand. No one mentioned my achievement, not even in passing. It wasn't just neglect. It was active preference. It was a choice. Daily. Repeated. The marks of this were invisible, but deep. I became someone who asked for little, who spoke softly, who was content with crumbs, because I learned early on that no one would offer me the banquet. When Emily turned 18 and got a car as a gift, a metallic sedan with leather seats, I still took the bus to school, balancing my backpack on my lap and counting coins. When she crashed the car, crying on the phone, my dad responded in a calm voice. "Don't worry, sweetie. The important thing is that you're okay. We'll figure this out." A week later, there was another car in the garage. When I needed a new laptop for college because my old one's battery exploded, my mom said, "Can't you charge one to your card?" I could, and I did, in 12 installments, cutting back on coffees, canceling apps, refusing invitations. It was like this, always like this. Sometimes I tried to rationalize. I told myself that maybe Emily was more fragile, more sensitive, more needy. Maybe my parents thought she needed more. Maybe they saw in me a strength I never asked to have. But other times I just admitted the cruel truth. They always preferred her. Period. It was this silent recognition that shaped me, that taught me not to expect comfort or pats on the back, that taught me to celebrate my victories in silence, in the dark, that made me hide my tears, that made me depend only on myself. And even with all of this, even with all the emotional distance, even with all the unspoken wounds, there was a line that I believed they would never cross. A line of decency. A line of limit. But I was wrong. As wrong as a child who expects to be loved just for existing. Because what they did to me, what they used me for, went far beyond preference. It was betrayal, cold, calculated, and cruel. And I would never have discovered it if it weren't for the phone call from the bank. I requested copies of the documents from the bank. On the phone, my voice trembled, but I kept my composure. I used a firm, almost professional tone. The manager, a man named Michael, listened patiently and promised to check what he could. The next day, an email arrived. Subject: Mortgage documentation, Olivia Manser. I felt my stomach twist even before clicking. The PDF opened with a dry sound from my old notebook, and there it was. The contract, the total amount of $480,000, the automatic payment clause, the absurd interest rate, and finally, at the very end, in cold and indifferent letters, the signature. Mine. Or rather, what someone thought it would be. My eyes narrowed. The first reaction was disbelief. The curve of the O was wrong. The slant of the M was stiffer than my hand would have ever made. It was as if someone had taken a photo from far away, zoomed in as much as possible, and tried to copy it in a hurry. My heart beat so hard it seemed like the sound echoed through the room. That's not my handwriting, I murmured to myself, almost as if someone could hear me. Who did this? I took out my old documents, my records, my paperwork, those files that accumulate over the years, stored in folders we swear we'll never need again. I compared letter by letter. The difference was glaring. The lowercase a in my real signature always made a small upward curve. On the bank's paper, it was flattened, like a weight just thrown there. There was no doubt. It was forged. Clumsy. And at the same time, offensively confident. I sat on the edge of the bed and closed my eyes. A buzzing took over my ears, drowning out the world. Everything inside me screamed to act immediately, to demand explanations, confront, break the silence with a storm. But something in me chose to wait. Because if there was one thing I learned in that house where I grew up, where love was conditional and silence was currency, it was that reckless confrontations only fueled the theater of others. So I took a deep breath and chose my scene. The stage would be the 4th of July lunch, the traditional family gathering with patriotic tablecloths, burgers on the grill, and fake smiles. It was ironic, almost poetic, that independence would be celebrated right there where my freedom had been violated. In the days that followed, I carried the secret like a grenade without a pin, hidden in my chest. The weight of it shaped my posture, made my silence denser. I slept poorly, with images of the forged signature hovering in my dreams, like a shadow laughing at me. On the morning of July 4th, I wore a light blue blouse and tied my hair in a discreet bun. The mirror reflected a serene woman, but inside, I was lava, boiling, waiting for the right moment to emerge. When I arrived at the house where I grew up, I was greeted by the sound of laughter and the aroma of meat roasting in the backyard. The walls still held the same framed photos from years ago. Emily at her graduation, Emily with the childhood dog, Emily and my parents at a beach I wasn't invited to. My presence seemed to cause a slight unease, as if I were a formal guest, not a part of the place. My mom came to greet me with a polished smile, a kiss on the cheek, distant. My dad just nodded, busy with the barbecue. Emily arrived later, wearing a white dress, as if she were the star of a summer ad. She hugged me sideways, superficially. "I'm glad you came, Leave," she said, grabbing a glass of lemonade. I smiled, a smile that hurt at the corners of my mouth. "I wouldn't miss it for anything," I replied. And it was true. I wouldn't miss that moment for absolutely anything. The hours passed like a rehearsed play. My dad praised the meat's doneness. Emily talked about an interior design project she was developing for a super demanding client in Frisco. My mom handed out red napkins with American flags printed on them. I observed every movement, every word, like a director in silence, watching the final act of a tragedy disguised as a family comedy. And then, when the main courses were nearly finished, when the conversations began to dwindle and the utensils rested on the plates, the desserts arrived. Cheesecakes, apple pies, brownies with ice cream. Emily laughed, commenting how nobody made brownies like Mom. Everyone smiled. It was there. At that exact moment, between sweet bites and manufactured memories, that I decided it was time. Because among the desserts, the truth would also come. The barbecue was almost over. The Dallas sky burned in shades of orange, and the humid heat stuck to the skin like a promise that didn't want to be forgotten. The coals in the grill still sizzled, even though no one was paying attention anymore. Laughter was heard out of politeness, with mouths already occupied by the sweetness of apple pie, and the sound of Emily's laughter echoed like a rehearsed echo. Perfect, familiar, sickening. I sat at the porch table with calculated movements. The butter knife in my hand felt harmless, gliding over the slice of bread as though it didn't carry the tension running through my veins. It was almost poetic, surrounded by American flag bunting, deflated balloons, and half-empty glasses. The perfect setting for a real strike. My voice came out low, clear, without tremors. Can you explain to me why you put a house in my name? The sound of crickets in the yard increased, as if they had received the signal. Emily froze mid-laugh, her eyes still half-closed, mouth slightly ajar, as if unsure whether to swallow the bite of pie or the words that didn't come. My dad cleared his throat, dry, harsh, as if his throat was trying to push out an unprocessed regret. My mom paused with the pie spatula suspended in the air, still wearing that smile meticulously carved into her face. For a few seconds, no one said a word. The silence settled like a thick fog between us. I could hear my own heart. Calm. Dangerously calm. Then, my mom was the first to speak. Always her. "Olivia," she said, with that sweet tone she always used when she needed to turn a wound into a request. "Your sister needed help, and you, as the older sister, should support her. It's your responsibility. Responsibility." The word fell like a stone on the table, making the plate vibrate slightly. I let out a short laugh, the kind of laugh that precedes a storm. Is it my responsibility to have my name ruined? My dad scratched his eyebrow and avoided looking at me. Emily still hadn't said a word, which was unusual. Normally, she had an excuse ready, a justification with a bow on top. "Oh dear, you're strong," my mom said, rearranging the silverware as if the order of them could restore some dignity to the conversation. Emily needed a home. "A home worth almost $500,000, huh?" I shot back, still smiling. What a convenient coincidence. I guess the bank also found my strength inspiring while threatening to put my name on the American credit report. Emily finally opened her mouth. Her voice came out in a defensive, childlike tone, annoyingly fragile. "I swear it was just until I got a full-time job. They said they'd transfer it to my name afterward. I didn't even know that." She stopped, bit her lip, her eyes wide as if unsure whether to apologize or pretend innocence. "Oh, so the fraud was planned as a family affair?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. "Lovely. Truly a collective effort." "It's not fraud, Olivia," my dad exploded suddenly, raising his voice a bit. "It's just a misunderstanding. You've always been so rational. Why do this now? Why turn everything into a scandal?" "Because you turned my life into a trap," I replied, firm, but without shouting. "And you're asking me to smile while it burns." My mom moved closer, placing her hand over mine. It was a gesture that, to an observer, would seem tender. To me, it was disguised control. "Daughter," she whispered, "we just wanted the best for everyone. Emily has talent, she has ambition, she needed a chance. You're more stable, more capable." It was just until she got on her feet. She squeezed my hand, as if pleading for complicity. As if my pain could be swallowed in the name of family unity. "You're right," I said, letting go of the butter knife with a metallic snap on the plate. A silence of expectation fell over everyone. "I think it's really time to help my little sister." The faces lit up. My dad relaxed his shoulders. My mom squinted her eyes as if she were about to cry from relief. Emily breathed for the first time since I spoke. "Oh, Liv, I knew you'd understand," she said, with a smile that I never imagined could still irritate me so much. I smiled back, but my smile was not the same. I stood up slowly, grabbed my bag. The warm breeze of the night passed through my hair, and for a moment I thought the sky was laughing with me. "I'll be back soon," I said with a calm voice. "I just have a phone call to make." I walked away without looking back. Crossing the porch, going down the stairs, stepping firmly on the hot concrete. My heart beat with surgical precision. Every step was a goodbye to the version of me they had shaped. In the car, the phone in my hand, fingers steady. I dialed. "Hello. I'd like to schedule an appointment with the lawyer." Pause. Breathing. The sound of the engine starting. And then the phrase that sealed that chapter. "They thought I was weak." Little did they know, they were about to meet the woman they created. By force. My lawyer's name was Mark Evans, a man with a deep voice, an unflappable posture, and gray eyes that always seemed 2 steps ahead. When I entered his office, a discreet brick building in downtown Dallas, the sound of my heels echoed on the polished wood floor as if announcing a silent verdict. Mark listened without interrupting. I told him everything: the bank call, the forged signature, the mortgage contract, and most importantly, their names, my parents. He leaned slightly in his chair, interlaced his fingers on the table, and stared at me like a doctor before giving a diagnosis. Olivia, this is a crime. Identity fraud. They could face criminal charges for this, he said, with a calm that chilled me from within. The word crime seemed to float in the air, hanging between us like a specter I didn't want to invoke. Part of me still expected to hear something like, "It's just a technical error. Let's resolve this with a conversation." But Mark left no room for illusions. He wasn't a therapist. He was the kind of lawyer who used the law as a blade. "But they're my parents," I murmured in a quieter tone than I intended. He raised an eyebrow with a neutral expression. "And you are the victim. That doesn't change." That afternoon, I left his office with a service contract, a list of documents to gather, and a certainty that hurt more than any childhood rejection. I was going to war against my own family. For weeks, I dove into a sea of paperwork. I sifted through old files, dusty boxes, hidden folders. I found receipts showing I was in another state when the contract was signed. I received bank statements proving I had no involvement in that transaction. Mark, efficient as a Swiss clock, hired a handwriting expert. The report came in a few days. Forged signature. The words were there, in black ink as definitive as the crime itself. "We have everything we need to sue," he said, pushing the file toward me across the table. "It will hurt, Olivia, but if you want justice, it's now." I signed the papers. My hands still trembled a little, but, unlike before, it wasn't fear. It was poisoned anger from clarity. For the first time, I saw myself not as a daughter, but as a woman. As someone who was betrayed and chose not to swallow silences anymore. The subpoena was sent by a court officer 2 days later. On the 3rd day, my mom called me, crying. "Olivia, my daughter, how could you do this to us?" Her voice trembled, choked, as if I had put a knife to her chest, not the other way around. I had to hold myself back from laughing, because in that cry there was no remorse, there was victimization. "And how could you do this to me?" I replied firmly. There was a cold anger in my voice, the kind that doesn't shout, the kind that's built. She didn't answer. She just sniffled and hung up. 30 minutes later, I received a message from Emily. "You're cruel. Selfish. You've always wanted to compete with me, and now you're trying to destroy what we still have as a family. Congratulations." I took a deep breath. It hurt. Not because she was right, but because, even after everything, part of me still hoped she'd say, "I'm sorry." But no. She followed the script she knew well, the one where she was the victim, and I, the antagonist. The next day, my dad called me. "Olivia, what are you doing? This is going to expose the family. It's going to turn into a circus. You're about to destroy us." "No," I answered calmly. "You've already done that by yourselves. I'm just picking up the pieces and rebuilding what's left of me." He fell silent. A long silence. The kind of silence that used to make me retreat when I was a teenager. But now I was the woman with the truth in her hands and the law by her side. In court, they tried to negotiate. Their lawyer, a skinny guy with oily hair, tried to use a conciliatory tone. "If you withdraw the lawsuit, we're willing to make a deal. They'll transfer the house, pay the debt, and Miss Manser won't have to be involved in this anymore." I looked at Mark. He didn't need to say anything. I stared at their lawyer, then looked at my parents. Sitting on the bench, their faces down, either ashamed or perhaps just humiliated for being caught. Emily was next to them, her makeup flawless, eyes tear-streaked, a performance worthy of an award. "I don't accept," I replied. "They will answer for this. Because if it's not now, they'll do it to someone else. Or they'll keep thinking I'm weak." My dad pursed his lips. My mom turned her face. Emily shook her head, as if I were a stranger she barely recognized. But I didn't need them to recognize me anymore. I was seeing myself clearly for the first time. The case went on in the following months. Their lawyers tried everything: delay, push, disqualify. But Mark was patient, surgical, ruthless when necessary. I attended every hearing with sharp eyes and steady steps. I learned more about the law than I ever imagined, but most importantly, I learned about myself. Every testimony was a stab, but also a cut of liberation. The judge heard the reports, testimonies, bank records, and evidence of forgery. Everything pointed to them. And then came the day, the final hearing. The courthouse hallway was cold, with beige walls and the air conditioner crackling above us. I wore navy blue, hair tied back, eyes straight ahead, breathing controlled. When I entered the room, they were already there. All of them. My mom with her head down, my dad trying to maintain his posture. Emily, with a look that mixed fury and something I finally identified. Fear. Mark lightly touched my elbow and whispered, "Are you ready?" And I said, with a firm voice, with my whole soul, "More than ever." And in that moment, with everyone in the defendant's seat, the judge's eyes on me, the room waiting for my word, I was the one who set the rules. I won. Not with fireworks, not with applause, but with the firmness of a sentence that resonated deeper than any shout. The judge flipped through the documents for a brief, silent moment before raising his eyes. The room, cold and tense, seemed to stop breathing. After reviewing the evidence presented, it is clear that there was fraud in the acquisition of the mortgage loan in the name of the petitioner, Olivia Manser. I sentence that the responsibility for the debt lies solely with the defendants, Mr. John and Mrs. Margaret Manser, and Emily Manser, the direct beneficiary of the financing. I didn't look at them. I didn't need to. In fact, I didn't want to. At that moment, my only anchor was the feeling. The breath that left my chest as if it had been held in for years. The weight that drained from my shoulders, almost making me falter for a second. The dry sound of the judge's gavel hitting the wood was the final push. A lifetime of silences, of denials, of looking in the mirror and trying to understand where I had gone wrong. All of that finally found an echo in something that wasn't just pain, it was justice. My name was cleared, officially. And curiously, it was at that exact moment that my soul began to be cleansed. Not by magic, not by relief, but because for the first time, I felt whole. They, of course, didn't let it slide. On the way out of the courthouse, still in the cold marble corridor, my mother looked at me as if I were a stranger. Her eyes were red, her face pale, but what shocked me the most was the tone in which she spoke. It wasn't pain, it was accusation. "You ruined our family, Olivia. How can you live with that?" My father, standing next to her, maintained his usual rigid posture. Arms crossed, eyes fixed on the floor. There was no true shame, only the humiliation of having lost. Emily didn't look at me. She pretended to search for something in her purse. The flawless makeup hid her eyes, but not the subtle tremor in her hands. I took a deep breath. I raised my chin. "Love without respect is not love," I said, with the calmness of someone who no longer needed to defend themselves. "It's prison, and I chose to leave." And I walked away. I didn't run. I didn't tremble. I didn't cry. Walking through that corridor felt like walking through years of silence, layers and layers of "swallow it, Olivia, don't make a scene, understand her side, you're stronger." But with that firm step toward the exit, I left it all behind. Not for revenge, but for survival. I returned to my apartment in Dallas that same day. There were still boxes in the corner of the room, the kind we never unpack because we always believe deep down that we'll need to leave again, start again. But that night, I opened them all. I started with the smallest item, an old sheet of music I had bought in a used bookstore years ago when I still dreamed of learning the piano. I went to the computer and impulsively I entered a local auction site. 2 hours later, I had bid on a used upright piano, dark wood with worn-out keys, scars that in some way matched me. The piano arrived 4 days later. The sound was a little out of tune on the low notes, but it was mine. Each key I played seemed to open a hidden drawer inside me. I started painting again. First timidly, with charcoal on loose sheets of paper. Then with brushes. Paints. Canvases that occupied half of my room. They were smudges at first, then shapes, then faces. My face, in pieces, slowly coming together. I went hiking alone around Dallas. I climbed hills, watched birds with binoculars I bought on a whim. I felt no fear. I felt space. And then I cooked. Not for anyone, not out of obligation, but because my body deserved care. I made fresh pasta on a cloudy Sunday, risotto on a Thursday. I ate while listening to jazz, drinking wine, dancing alone with bare feet on the kitchen floor. I discovered that solitude is not absence, it is space. A space where my voice could echo without being drowned out, where my choices didn't need permission, where my story could be written without the weight of other people's eyes trying to edit every line. There were days of dense silence, yes. Days when I found myself looking at old photos, wondering exactly where the thread of family connection had snapped. But on those days, I learned that longing and toxicity can coexist, and that the first doesn't justify the presence of the second. I never heard from them again. Not seeking reconciliation, not seeking forgiveness, only silence. And I learned to love that sound. I, who always feared being alone, discovered that being alone was what saved me. That what I lacked was never affection from others, but respect for myself. Now my days are mine. My dreams don't need approval, and my strength, it is no longer silenced by any blood ties. Today, looking back, I don't feel resentment, I feel pride. Because revenge, that word so many fear, is not about hurting. It's about rising. It's about looking into the eyes of those who brought you down and saying, you didn't win. And in this journey, through lawsuits, sleepless nights, out-of-tune notes, and spilled paints, I discovered something that changed everything. My life doesn't belong to anyone, not even those who call me daughter. Sometimes the one who seems to be by our side is the one who first sharpens the blade against our backs. But when we survive the knife, the scar becomes armor. You know, family should be synonymous with love, care, protection. But what if the deepest wound comes from the ones who gave you your name? From those who promised you the world, but only gave you weight, guilt, and silence? I told my story. And now I ask you, have you ever gone through something like this? Have you ever felt that, within your own home, you were the stranger? The extra weight? The piece that didn't fit? If this story touched you in some way, leave a like. Subscribe to the channel. There's a lot of powerful stuff coming your way. Stories that hurt, but also heal. That sting, but set you free. And look, click on the video that's showing on the screen now. It's another story of intense, transformative female revenge. You won't want to miss it. We'll see you there.